The Lantern Diner was nearly empty on a Tuesday night, the kind of hour when the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Aria Vale stood behind the counter, shoulders aching from another long shift, the smell of fried onions clinging to her uniform. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, casting an uneven red glow across the smudged windows. She glanced at her phone tucked discreetly behind the register. The wallpaper showed a velvet box, and inside it was a pale gold ring etched with a phoenix, a single sapphire eye glittering against the fabric. A faint scrawl on the edge of the photograph showed words her mother had once whispered, "Keep it safe for the right person." Aria locked the screen quickly as the bell over the door chimed. A man entered, and the atmosphere shifted. The two patrons at the counter lowered their voices instinctively, as though his presence demanded reverence. He was tall, wrapped in a charcoal coat tailored with a precision that spoke of wealth and power. His posture was effortless command, as if the room bent slightly around him. Aria recognized the type even before her coworker Chloe muttered, "Wealthy, arrogant, untouchable," under her breath. Yet this man was different. His pale blue eyes scanned the diner with a detached calm before settling on a corner booth. He moved with the quiet grace of someone sculpted for boardrooms and battlefields. Aria approached with a menu and a rehearsed smile. "Welcome to the Lantern." "Coffee black," he said before she could finish. His voice carried the weight of polished authority, deep and resonant like a cello bowing through silence. She nodded, retreating to the counter, heat pricking at the back of her neck. Chloe leaned closer, whispering to Lucian Cade. "Cade Holdings. He owns half this city. Ruthless. Turned millions into billions. My dad worked construction for them before the layoffs. That's him, Aria. That's the man." Aria glanced back at him. His profile was sharp against the neon wash, and he was less businessman than predator resting between hunts. She shook off the unease, poured the coffee, and carried it to his booth. "Here you are, sir." He reached for the cup, and time seemed to stall. His sleeve shifted, revealing a ring. Gold, pale as butter, carved with interwoven feathers. On its flat face burned the image of a phoenix, wings spread wide, sapphire eye gleaming under the diner's fluorescent glare. Aria's breath hitched. Her world narrowed to that glint of blue. It was not just similar. It was identical to the ring in the velvet box by her mother's hospital bed. The same sapphire eye that Mara Vale had sworn was her most sacred possession. A gift from her father. A promise never to sell, no matter how dire the bills became. Aria felt the words rising before she could stop them. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours." Lucian froze, his hand still hovering above the cup. Slowly, he retracted it, lifting his gaze to meet hers. The dismissive air was gone. In its place was a blade of scrutiny so sharp it seemed to cut through her skin. The diner's hum receded until only the hammering of her pulse filled her ears. "Excuse me," his voice softened, more dangerous in restraint than volume. Chloe looked up from across the room, sensing the shift. Aria pointed with a trembling finger. "The ring on your hand. It is the same as my mother's. The phoenix, the sapphire, every detail." A shadow crossed his face. He turned his hand as if seeing the ring anew, and spoke with chilling finality. "That is impossible. This ring has belonged to my family for over a century. It was commissioned for my great-grandfather, Alaric Cade. There is no other. There has never been another." Aria's spine stiffened. She remembered her mother's frail hands clutching that ring, whispering it was proof of what was right. "I am not mistaken," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I know every line of it. I could draw it from memory." Lucian leaned back, eyes narrowing. "A fascinating claim. What is your name?" "Aria Vale." He lifted the coffee cup, sipped deliberately, then set it down with a click that echoed like a verdict. "Then, your mother is either a liar or a thief, because the only way she holds a ring like this is if it was stolen from my family 50 years ago." The word hung between them, poisonous and heavy. Stolen. Aria's heart rebelled. Her mother, Mara Vale, who returned coins of wrong change, was branded a thief. The injustice ignited a fire she could not suppress. She shook her head, fury spilling through the cracks of exhaustion. She is not a thief. Lucian rose, his presence filling the booth like a storm. He placed 3 crisp bills on the table, payment for the coffee and for your time. Then he walked to the door, cold authority in every step. At the threshold, he paused, voice carrying across the silent diner. "Prove it." The bell chimed as he left, leaving Arya rooted in place, pulse racing. She stared at the bills that felt like blood money and at the empty doorway where his silhouette had vanished. A single sentence had just unlocked a door she never knew existed. And now she stood trembling on the threshold of secrets powerful enough to burn empires to the ground. The night outside pressed against the windows of the Lantern Diner, neon light flickering like a heartbeat on the edge of collapse. Arya Vale stood frozen beside the booth, the sting of Lucian Cade's words still slicing through her chest. Her mother is either a liar or a thief. He had said it with such certainty, as though the power of his family's name alone could transform accusation into fact. Arya's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. She had not intended to speak. The words about the ring had slipped out like a secret, dragged into the open. And now, the world she had known seemed to teeter on the brink of ruin. Lucian did not look back, his hand pressed against the door as if the matter were closed, as if her life, her mother's dignity, could be dismissed as easily as a bad investment. The bell above the door jingled faintly, a cheerful sound at odds with the ice settling into the room. Arya's knees felt weak, but rage surged through her exhaustion. She stepped forward, her voice carrying farther than she expected. "She is not a thief." The words cut across the silence like glass shattering. Lucian paused, one hand still on the doorframe. The other patrons, pretending not to watch, turned fully now. Chloe's eyes widened, her lips parting in a silent warning. Do not push him. But it was too late. The moment had already cracked open. Lucian's shoulders stiffened. Without turning, he spoke, his tone even colder than before. "Then prove it." His voice was not raised, yet it rang with a dangerous finality that left no room for negotiation. He left the diner, the sound of his departing footsteps swallowed by the night. Arya stood in the vacuum of his absence. The 3 bills on the table glared at her like accusations. $100, $200, $300. Enough to pay for a week's worth of medication, maybe even a month's groceries. But they felt poisoned. She refused to touch them. Her hands trembled as she gripped the counter's edge instead, nails biting into the laminate. Chloe hurried over, whispering fiercely, "Arya, what were you thinking? That man could buy and sell this whole city. You saw the look on his face. He will not forget you. He will not forgive you." Arya's throat burned, but her voice was steady. "I saw the ring, Chloe. It was the same as my mother's, not similar, the same." Chloe shook her head, fear plain in her eyes. "Then your mother has something that belongs to him, and that means trouble. Big trouble." The rest of the shift blurred. Arya moved through the motions of cleaning, serving, and counting the till, but her mind spun in circles around the word Lucian had left behind, stolen. She could still hear the deliberate click of his cup against the saucer, the sound of a judge delivering a sentence. Each time the memory replayed, the fire in her chest flared hotter. Arya entered the cool night air when the clock finally crawled past midnight, and Chloe locked the doors. The streets hummed with distant traffic, and the glow of street lamps painted long shadows across the pavement. She pulled her jacket tighter, the autumn chill gnawing at her bones. Every instinct told her to let it go, to push the encounter into the dark corners of memory, and pretend it had never happened. But a quieter yet sharper voice whispered that some truths refused to stay buried. She drove across the city, headlights cutting through the gloom, heart pounding with every red light. Lucian's words echoed relentlessly. "Liar! Thief! Prove it!" The road blurred until she pulled into the hospital parking lot, the familiar ache of dread tightening her chest. She climbed the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, each step an effort to burn away the poison of the accusation. Her mother's room was dim, and the only sound was the steady beep of the cardiac monitor. Mara Vale lay asleep, pale but peaceful under the thin hospital blanket. On the bedside table sat the small velvet box, the ring. Arya reached for it, her fingers brushing the worn fabric. She opened the lid slowly, and there it was, catching the faint light from the hallway, gleaming as if it knew it had been summoned into question. Her throat closed as she lifted it carefully. The same pale gold, the same carved feathers, the same sapphire eye that seemed to hold the night sky within it. 100 years of Cade family history had just collided with the fragile life of her mother. Arya's chest tightened. She could not tell Mara what had been said. Not yet. The words would crush her, and Mara had already endured enough. Arya closed the box and returned it gently to the table. She sat beside the bed, watching her mother breathe. She made a vow in the silence, not spoken aloud but etched into her bones. She would prove it. She would defend her mother's name against the power of Lucian Cade and the empire he represented, no matter the cost. Outside, the city pulsed, indifferent to her resolve. But in that hospital room, Arya's fire had found its shape. The confrontation at the diner had not ended. It had only just begun. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted flowers, a fragile kingdom where Mara Vale fought her quiet battle. Arya sat on the edge of the chair, the velvet box heavy in her lap. She had carried it from the bedside table as if it were sacred, her fingers brushing the frayed edges, worn smooth by decades of touch. She lifted the lid again, unable to resist, and the gold phoenix glimmered under the sterile light. Its sapphire eye caught the glow and shimmered, like a secret waiting to be spoken aloud. Her chest tightened. The diner encounter replayed in her mind with cruel clarity. Lucian Cade's cold eyes, his verdict of thief, his dismissal that cut deeper than any blade. She heard him as if he still stood at her side. Prove it. And here she was with proof, yet not proof enough. Not in the eyes of men who measured truth by wealth and lineage. Mara stirred, coughing lightly. Arya snapped the box closed and tucked it against her chest. Her mother's eyes opened, clouded with illness yet still sharp with the old stubborn fire. "You are late," she rasped, voice thin but steady. Rough shift. Arya forced a smile, the usual. She did not want to burden her mother with the words that burned her tongue. She tried to deflect, but Mara's gaze slid to the box in her hands. Her expression changed, shadows gathering behind her eyes. "You were looking at the ring." Arya hesitated. "I was thinking about it. About Dad." Mara corrected gently, as she always did. "Your grandfather. It was my father who gave it to me, not your father." She reached out a frail hand, veins mapping her skin like rivers, and touched the box. "That ring is more than gold, Arya. It is a promise." Arya felt the sting of unshed tears. "Mom, tell me again. About him. About the ring." Mara's eyes drifted to the window, where the city lights pulsed faintly and distantly. Her voice softened with memory. Ethan Crowell was an engineer. Quiet, brilliant, too trusting. He worked for a large corporation back east. He always said the ring was payment for a promise broken by powerful men. Arya leaned forward, breath caught in her throat. "What kind of promise?" He never said. Only that it was about recognizing what was right. "He made me swear never to sell it, never to let it go. He told me one day it might be the only proof we have." Proof of what? For the first time, Mara faltered. A flicker of fear crossed her face. She squeezed Arya's hand with surprising strength. "Leave it be, Arya. It is an old story, a sad story. It has nothing to do with us anymore. Some doors are best left closed." Arya shook her head. "But what if someone else has a reason to open that door?" Mara's grip tightened, alarm flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean? What happened?" Arya cursed herself. She saw the spike on the heart monitor and quickly forced a smile. "Nothing, just work. A stupid thing at work. Forget I said anything." But inside, she could not forget. The words carved themselves deeper, a promise broken. Proof, powerful men. It all echoed against Lucian's accusation. The ring was not just jewelry, it was a key. Mara reclined slowly, exhaustion returning. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Your grandfather carried a sadness he never spoke of. The ring was his anchor. He told me once that integrity has a weight greater than gold." I never understood until he was gone. Arya brushed a strand of hair from her mother's forehead. Rest, Mom. You need your strength. Mara's eyes closed, but her hand lingered over the box. When she spoke again, it was half in a dream. One day, the phoenix will rise for the right person. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of the monitor. Arya sat alone, her mind a storm. She opened the box again and studied the phoenix. Guardian of the soul, she thought, not just a ring, a legacy. She remembered the scrawl she had glimpsed once in the box's lining when she was younger. Words faded almost beyond recognition. Please keep it safe for the right person. She traced the spot with her thumb and felt the indentation still there. Her grandfather had left a mark, a whisper through time. Her pulse quickened. She no longer felt the helpless weight of a waitress buried in hospital bills. She felt the stirrings of something larger. If Lucian Cade demanded proof, she would find it, not only for herself, but also for Mara, Ethan Crowell, and for the truth, silenced by power. Arya closed the box and set it carefully back on the table. She kissed her mother's forehead, rose from the chair, and looked again at the sleeping figure. The fight was not Mara's anymore, it was hers. Outside, dawn began to gray the horizon. The city was waking, unaware of the storm gathering in its heart. Arya walked down the hospital corridor, each step carrying her closer to the door Lucian had unlocked with his challenge. She would open it, and she would not turn back. The penthouse towered above the city like a citadel, its glass walls reflecting 1,000 fractured lights. Inside, Lucian Cade stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, the skyline spread beneath him like a jeweled map. He held a glass of scotch, but the amber liquid remained untouched. The encounter at the diner replayed in his mind with unnerving persistence. The waitress's words cut through layers of control he had spent a lifetime perfecting. "My mother has a ring just like yours." He turned from the window, restless. The ring on his finger felt heavier than it ever had. He twisted it slowly, watching the sapphire catch the glow of the city, the phoenix etched into gold, staring back at him with its eternal gaze. This symbol had always been his anchor, the mark of the Cade family's resilience, a legacy of survival and victory. Yet now it was a crack, a flaw in the marble, threatening to split the entire foundation. He crossed the room to a heavy mahogany desk, sleek and severe, its surface clear except for a green-shaded lamp and a locked drawer. With deliberate care, he withdrew a key and opened the drawer. Inside lay the Cade family archives, a leather-bound folio curated to present history as power wished it remembered. He flipped through the yellowed pages until he reached the section on heirlooms. There was a photograph of the ring, accompanied by text in his grandfather's handwriting. It was commissioned in 1922 by Alaric Cade and forged by Morel Dubois of Paris. Unique design, symbol of the Cade rebirth following the Panic of 1921. Passed from father to son, one heir to the next. Singular, unbroken. Lucian read it twice, yet the words no longer held certainty. He thought of his grandfather William and the stories told over brandy late at night. Stories of betrayal, whispers of a brother erased. Nathaniel Owen Cade. Officially, he had never existed. In family gatherings, he was nothing more than a ghost story told to emphasize loyalty. A warning of what happens to those who defy the bloodline. Lucian set the folio down and pressed his fingers to his temples. He had built his empire on precision, on eliminating doubt. But now, doubt spread like ink across parchment. The phone on his desk vibrated. He answered with clipped efficiency. Celine Hart, his fixer, his confidant, the woman who handled the messes he would not soil his hands with. Her voice was crisp, unwavering. "What is it this time, Lucian?" "Please, run a background check," he said, his voice tight. Discreet, thorough, another company, a hostile bid, a person, a waitress. Her name is Arya Vale. Her mother's name is Mara Vale. I want everything, lineage, finances, family records, especially the grandfather, Ethan Crowell. There was a pause on the line, brief but noticeable. Celine was too professional to ask why, Yet Lucian felt her unspoken question anyway. Is this personal or professional? Lucian stared at the ring, the sapphire eye glinting like a cold star. I am not sure yet, but it could become problematic. After he hung up, he remained seated, staring at the folio. His thoughts drifted back to his grandfather, William, to the drunken mutterings of another lifetime. William had once spoken of betrayal, of designs stolen, of an older brother who tried to take what was his. The tale always ended the same way. The traitor vanished, cast out, his name erased. The ring was said to have been stolen with him. Lucian clenched his jaw. The official record denied the existence of a second ring. The folio declared singularity. Yet the conviction in Arya Vale's eyes haunted him. That quiet certainty unsettled him more than any boardroom adversary. He walked to a safe recessed in the wall, unlocked it, and drew out a small box of his own. Inside was another heirloom, letters written in the 1960s, correspondence between William Cade and his head of security. Lucian had discovered them years ago, but dismissed them as relics. He unfolded one with trembling fingers, surveillance on the Crowell family proceeding. The subject shows signs of distress. Consider neutralization if non-compliant. The words crawled across his vision like fire. Neutralization. Asset secured. He closed his eyes, breathing through the surge of unease. If his grandfather had stolen not only ideas but lives, then the Cade Empire stood on poisoned ground. The ring pressed heavily into his flesh. He almost felt it accusing him, as though the phoenix no longer symbolized rebirth but judgment. Lucian felt something he despised above all else for the first time in years: uncertainty. He finally poured the scotch, though the drink did little to steady his hands. He thought of Arya's defiance and insistence that she knew every line of the ring. He had dismissed her as a waitress, insignificant, but now she loomed in his mind larger than any rival CEO. Prove it. He had hurled the challenge at her with contempt, but the words rebounded, echoing back against him. Now, he too would have to prove it. Prove that his family's story was not a fabrication. Prove that the legacy he carried was more than a gilded lie. The city lights glittered like a million watchful eyes. Lucian stood in the fortress of his penthouse, but for the first time it felt less like a bastion and more like a cage. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the monitor. Mara Vale lay propped up by thin pillows, her face pale but her eyes sharp, as though illness could not dim the steel in her gaze. Arya sat close, the velvet box resting between them, its weight a silent invitation. She had tried to hide the diner encounter, but the words burned too fiercely to remain unspoken. She needed answers, and she needed them from the only person left who carried the truth. Mom, Arya began softly telling me again about the ring. Tell me about grandfather Ethan. Mara's fingers brushed the box lid as though touching an old scar. He was a good man, she said, a brilliant engineer who believed in merit and trust. But he was too trusting. That was his undoing. Her voice drifted, and the sterile walls of the hospital seemed to dissolve into memory. Arya saw it as clearly as if she had been there herself. A kitchen in a small house, the scent of oil and metal clinging to her grandfather's clothes. Papers spread across the table, diagrams of a turbine gear system, lines drawn with the careful hand of a man who believed his work would matter. He worked for a corporation back east. Mara continued in a low and steady tone. But he had dreams of his own, designs that could change everything. He mistakenly shared them with a colleague he thought was a friend. That colleague left for a senior position at Cade Industries. Months later, two men arrived at our door. Arya's mind painted the scene from her mother's words. Evening shadows stretch across the kitchen floor. The men in dark coats are laying photographs across the table. Images of Mara as a child playing in a schoolyard. Images of Arya's grandmother leaving a grocery store. Smiles captured in the lens now twisted into threats. They said he had a beautiful family. Mara's voice trembled. And they said it would be a shame if something happened to them. Then they slid papers across the table. A non-disclosure agreement. A contract assigning all rights to his invention to a shell corporation. And an envelope full of cash. Arya's stomach knotted. What did he do? What choice did he have? Mara's eyes shone with unshed tears. He signed. He signed because refusing meant defiance, and defiance meant danger. We moved a week later. He left engineering forever. He was never the same. They did not just take his work, Arya, they took his spirit. In Arya's mind, the flashback sharpened. She saw Ethan Crowell's trembling hand as he signed his name, the pen scratching across the paper while the men watched with cold indifference. She heard her grandmother's muffled sob from the doorway. She saw the envelope on the table, thick with money that carried the stink of coercion. Mara's voice broke. He died 6 years later of a heart attack, but the truth is he was already dead that night in our kitchen. Tears stung Arya's eyes. She reached for her mother's hand. He was not weak, Mom. He protected you. He protected us. Mara nodded faintly. Perhaps. But the weight of that silence killed him slowly. Only the ring remained. Arya looked at the box. And Daniel, who was he? For the first time, Mara flinched at the name. Where did you hear that? From Lucian Cade. He said his great-grandfather had 2 rings made, one for himself and one for his brother Daniel, who was cast out. Mara's gaze turned inward, searching memories long buried. He never said the name Cade. He only called him my friend, a man who came when my father was broken. He said he too had been betrayed by powerful blood. They spoke for hours, 2 outcasts bound by the same wound. Arya leaned closer. What did he do? Before he left town, Mara whispered that he had given my father the ring. He said it symbolized a dream shared by brothers, but twisted by greed. He told my father to keep it safe. Remember that integrity is worth more than power. He said one day the phoenix would rise for the right person. The hospital room settled into silence. The monitor beeped steadily and calmly, but Arya felt her pulse race. She saw her grandfather signing away his life, saw the photographs laid like weapons, saw the outcast Daniel offering a ring as proof that someone still believed. She closed the box with deliberate care. Lucian Cade had demanded proof. Now she carried the beginning of it, and she would follow it wherever it led, even if it meant walking straight into the heart of the Cade Empire. The ancestral estate of the Cade family rose out of the countryside like a fortress of stone and shadow. Lucian rarely visited. To him, it was a mausoleum, a place where portraits of stern ancestors stared down from paneled walls and whispered of expectations carved in granite. Yet tonight, he needed answers, which lived in the archives sealed within its halls. He arrived under a cold moon. The gravel drive crunched beneath the tires of his black car, the mansion's windows glowing faintly, as if lit by the ghosts of the past. Inside, the scent of aged wood and polish lingered. The silence was broken by a voice warm on the surface, but edged with calculation. Lucian, what a surprise! Damon Cade appeared at the threshold of the library, brandy glass in hand. Older by a few years, Damon carried himself with a charm honed by endless galas and charitable dinners. He managed the family foundation, which demanded more appearances than achievements. To most, he was genial, harmless. To Lucian, he was a question mark. Business in the city becomes too dull, Damon asked, smiling as he poured another glass. Or have you come to bury yourself in these dusty bones? Lucian ignored the jest. I need information about Nathaniel. The smile faltered, then returned with practiced smoothness. Nathaniel. That ghost again, the family's favorite cautionary tale. The dreamer who tried to overthrow Alaric, a traitor who vanished with secrets and a stolen ring. Damon sipped leisurely. Why the sudden interest? Because I no longer believe in ghost stories, Lucian replied. Damon studied him over the rim of the glass. His tone shifted, no longer casual. Be careful, cousin. Digging up old bones has a way of making the living bleed. You, of all people, know how fragile a reputation can be. Lucian's eyes narrowed. Please do not patronize me. Tell me the truth. Damon laughed softly, but his gaze was sharp. The truth is what the family decided it was. Alaric was the builder, Nathaniel the betrayer. That is the record we protect. And why defend it? Because Lucian Damon's voice lowered conspiratorially, that story keeps us strong. It justifies the empire. Without it, the foundation cracks. Do you want the world to see our name unravel? Or do you want to hand ammunition to those who would destroy us? Lucian said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Damon swirled the amber liquid and leaned closer. Let me guess, someone has whispered otherwise. Someone from outside, a waitress perhaps. The words landed like a blade. Damon's smile widened, satisfied he had struck true. Be wary. Women like that see opportunity where you see sentiment. She might not even know what game she is playing, but I promise she is playing one. Lucian kept his expression blank, though inside, suspicion coiled tighter. Damon had sources too close for comfort. His warning carried venom masked as concern. The library doors closed behind Damon's retreating figure, leaving Lucian alone. He turned to the west wing, where family papers gathered dust. The study smelled of old smoke and forgotten power. Boxes lined the shelves, ribbons faded with time. Lucian opened one and began to sift through letters written in William Cade's elegant hand. At first, they were routine. Notes on construction projects, acquisitions, and political contributions. Then he found a different tone. Memoranda addressed to the head of security. Subject Crowell under surveillance. His wife and child observed daily. Subject distressed. Next report. Consider neutralization. Final memo. Subject neutralized. Asset secured. The words blurred as Lucian's pulse thundered. Ethan Crowell, the grandfather of the woman at the diner. Not a thief, not a liar. A man hunted and silenced. He closed his eyes. The Scotch Damon had pressed into his hand, now sour in his mouth. The empire he had sworn to defend was laced with rot. And Damon, with his careful smile, knew more than he admitted. Perhaps he intended to wield the secret as leverage, probably as a weapon to claim power within Cade Holdings. Lucian folded the memo and slipped it into his pocket. The weight of it dragged on him like chains. The family had told a tale of betrayal and resilience. Now he knew another version, one written in shadows and threats. Somewhere between the two lies the truth. As he left the study, the portraits of Alaric and William seemed to glare down with cold judgment. Their painted eyes followed him, guardians of a lie built into the dynasty's foundation. Lucian clenched his jaw. The fortress he had inherited was not a strength but a prison, and outside its gates waited a woman who carried a ring and the fire of defiance. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he needed her, not to destroy or silence her, but to face the storm together. Because the dynasty was cracking, and only by unearthing every buried truth could it survive what came next. The cafeteria smelled of burnt coffee and overcooked vegetables, the scent that clung to every hospital and reminded visitors of fatigue more than nourishment. Aria Vale sat hunched at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a paper cup, though the coffee inside had long gone cold. Her eyes were shadowed from sleeplessness, but her thoughts refused to quiet. Every detail of the diner encounter replayed, every syllable of Lucian Cade's accusation rattling through her skull. Her mother was not a thief. She knew it with every breath. Yet the doubt he had sown gnawed at her, sharper than hunger, heavier than exhaustion. She had almost convinced herself that Lucian would vanish back into his empire, leaving her family in peace. But when the scrape of a chair sounded across from her, she looked up and saw him. Lucian Cade, immaculate even in the fluorescent hospital light, no tailored armor of boardrooms tonight, but still carrying the air of command. His presence pulled the air taut. "We need to talk," he said, placing a thin folder between them on the table. His tone carried no arrogance this time, only a cold gravity. Aria's pulse quickened. "You should not be here, I know, but you need to see this." She hesitated, then slid the folder closer and opened it. Inside were copies of documents, black and white photographs, and typed memoranda, surveillance reports. The words blurred for a moment before they focused into horror. Subject Crowell observed. Daughter photographed in the schoolyard. Wife followed home from the market. Subject showing signs of collapse. Recommendation neutralization. Arya's throat closed. She flipped page after page, each an incision into the past she had only guessed at. Her grandfather was reduced to a case file, and his family was reduced to leverage. Her stomach churned. "These are your family's records." "Yes," Lucian answered, cold, precise. "My grandfather ordered it." He paused, the weight of the admission heavy. "Your mother was right." Arya looked at him sharply. "Why show me this? Why not bury it deeper?" "Because my story is collapsing," he admitted, his voice lower now, stripped of its former certainty. "And so is yours. There is more to it than either of us knows." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper, laying it atop the reports. Written in frantic cursive were words that chilled them both. "He knows. Found him. Daniel is the key. Must protect the name." Arya traced the lines with trembling fingers. "Daniel, always Daniel. My mother said he was her father's friend. A man betrayed like him. He gave my grandfather the ring." Lucian's gaze was sharp. What if that was not the whole truth? What if Daniel's disappearance was not exile, but something larger? "My family calls him a traitor. Yours calls him a friend." Somewhere between those lies is the answer. Arya shut the folder with a snap. "And why should I help you find it?" "Because you want the same thing I do, the truth." She studied him, the man who had called her mother a thief, who had humiliated her in front of strangers. And yet, now he sat across from her, the ring on his hand gleaming like a silent accuser, and offered her the one thing she had craved since childhood: answers. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I do not care about your fortune or your empire. I care about my mother holding her head high. If this truth clears her name, I will chase it to the end." Lucian inclined his head, almost a bow, though his pride would never allow it fully. "Then we will chase it together." She looked at the folder again. The surveillance photos of a little girl in a schoolyard. Her mother's childhood was stolen. She swallowed the fury and nodded once. An alliance forged not by trust, but necessity. The air between them shifted. No longer enemies, not yet allies, but bound by the weight of shared inheritance. Two families, two rings, one fractured history. Lucian rose. "There is a record in Paris. Mireille Dubois, the artisan who forged the rings. Her ledgers still exist. I have already had pages scanned. I will need your eyes." Arya stood as well, the folder clutched to her chest. "Then let us start." Their gazes locked, and the walls of suspicion thinned for the first time. Outside the cafeteria, the night deepened, the hospital silent except for the echo of footsteps. Together they walked into the unknown, their uneasy alliance sealed not with trust, but with the certainty that neither could survive this storm alone. Lucian's office stretched across the 81st floor, its glass walls holding back the city's endless sprawl. At night, the view was a constellation of lights, but Arya Vale barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the vast screen that covered one wall. Projected there in high resolution was a page scanned from an ancient leather-bound ledger. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was precise. Elegant strokes penned in Paris more than a century ago. Mireille Dubois, master artisan, had recorded every commission in careful script. Lucien stood at her side, arms crossed, his face lit by the glow. "This is the original entry," he said. "Alaric Cade commissioned the Phoenix Ring in 1922. But look closely." He zoomed the image, magnifying the lines until each letter loomed across the glass. Arya leaned in. The familiar words caught her eye. One for the builder, one for the guardian of the soul. She whispered the translation slowly. Guardian of the soul. The translator had rendered it differently before, Lucien explained. Dreamer. But you know French. Arya nodded, tracing the script with her fingertip, though it was only glass light. Guardian of the soul. Not a dreamer. That changes everything. Her mind raced. The rings were not meant to divide, but to balance. One to build, one to guard. Together they represented two halves of a whole legacy. It meant Nathaniel had not been an enemy at all. He was intended as a counterpart. Lucien exhaled slowly. My family erased him by turning partnership into betrayal. They studied the entry in silence until Arya noticed a smaller annotation in the margin. written in different ink, decades later. What is that? Lucien zoomed closer. The words were faint, spidery. He translated haltingly. Received a letter from Monsieur Daniel Pierce. He requests a modification to the second ring, which has an inscription inside the band. He is no longer a Cade. He is something else. The annotation was dated 1945. Aria's breath caught. He asked for a name. She pointed to the scrawl that followed. Owen. Her chest tightened. Owen was her grandfather's name. Lucien frowned. That is what I thought at first. But look at the date. 1945. Your grandfather, Ethan, would not have even met him yet. This inscription cannot be for Ethan. Then who? Lucien crossed the office to his desk, fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up genealogical records. Names and dates scrolled across the secondary screen. He traced the tree back to Alaric Cade, the patriarch. His wife, Beatrice Beaumont. Her father, Owen Beaumont, is a shipping magnate. Died in 1944. Lucien stopped, the realization striking like a blow. It was not a dedication to your grandfather. It was a memorial to mine. Nathaniel inscribed his own middle name, Owen. Daniel Owen Pierce. He reclaimed what his brother tried to strip from him. Aria's hands trembled. So the ring was his identity, his proof. Lucien's voice was taut, and when he gave it to Ethan Crowell, it was not charity. It was passing on evidence. A piece of history capable of toppling the story upon which my family built its empire. The room felt heavy with revelation. The phoenix etched into the band now symbolized more than legacy. It was defiance, carved in gold. Aria looked at Lucien. Do you see it now? My mother is no thief. My grandfather was no liar. The ring was entrusted to him for safekeeping. Lucien nodded reluctantly. I see it, but it still leaves questions. Why did Nathaniel vanish? Why did my grandfather William hunt your family? What truth was so dangerous that it required erasing both men from history? Aria pressed her palms against the table, grounding herself. We have fragments, we need the rest. Lucien brought up the remaining scans, several entries, cross-references, and purchases of gold and gemstones. Nothing carried the weight of the first annotation, yet the pattern was clear. 2 rings were made, 2 destinies split apart. Aria spoke, her voice quiet but firm. The phoenix rises for the right person. My mother said those words. Maybe Nathaniel believed them too. Lucien turned from the screen to face her. The right person may be you. She shook her head. Number. It is us. Neither one of us can reach the truth alone. The city lights stretched into infinity outside the glass. 2 figures stood before the ledger of the past, divided by bloodlines but bound by a shared fracture. The ink of Morel Dubois had endured a century. Now it whispered across generations, demanding to be heard. Lucien placed his hand flat against the glass where the phoenix was drawn in careful script. Guardian of the soul, builder of the empire. The balance had been broken, but with Aria at his side, it could be restored. The ballroom of the Cade Foundation glittered with chandeliers and false splendor. Crystal glasses chimed, silk gowns swept across marble floors, and every corner pulsed with the smug laughter of the powerful. To the guests, it was another evening of philanthropy, another chance to bask in the glow of wealth disguised as generosity. But for Aria Vale and Lucien Cade, it was a battlefield. Aria stood near the entrance, and her mother Mara was seated in a wheelchair beside her. The doctors had warned against the stress, but Mara had insisted. This is not only your fight, she had said. It is mine. Her face was pale, her body frail, but her eyes burned with a strength born of decades of silence finally breaking. Aria held her hand, feeling the tremor of age and the pulse of defiance. Across the room, Damon Cade held court, a glass of wine in hand, and charming donors with easy laughter. He wore power like a second skin, every gesture calculated to reinforce his place as heir to the dynasty's influence. When he saw Lucien and Aria cutting through the crowd, his smile stiffened but did not falter. He raised his glass in mock welcome. Lucien's voice carried low but cold when they reached him. The games are over, Damon. We know about Nathaniel Owen Cade. We learn about the stolen invention. We know about the threats. Damon tilted his head as though amused. Cousin, you have always had a taste for melodrama. Do you really intend to pollute our gala with fairy tales whispered by desperate people? Before Lucien could reply, another voice rose, weak but sharpened by a microphone Mara had insisted on carrying. His fairy tale cost my father his life. The room froze. Conversations halted mid-word, glasses suspended mid-air. All eyes turned toward the frail woman in the wheelchair. Mara's voice gained strength as she continued. William Cade destroyed my father, Ethan Crowell, because he was friends with the man your family erased. My father was forced to keep your secret. Tonight I will not. Gasps rippled across the room. On the massive screens behind the stage, images flickered to life. Aria lifted her phone, streaming the scans of Mireille Dubois' ledger. The words appeared in luminous script for all to see. 2 rings commissioned, one for the builder, one for the guardian of the soul. Annotation, Owen. Damon's mask cracked, the smooth charm slipping into something brittle. He turned sharply to Lucien. You orchestrated this. You brought our name into the mud. Lucien's eyes blazed. No, Damon. Our grandfather did that when he silenced a man to protect his lies. You continued it when you tried to bury the truth. Damon's voice rose, desperation bleeding through arrogance. You fool, I was protecting us and protecting the legacy. Does anyone here care about your waitress or her tragic little story? They care about stability, about wealth. I kept the rot buried because that is what holds this house together. But he had forgotten the live microphone inches from his lapel. His words thundered across the ballroom, carried to every corner of the glittering hall. Guests stared in stunned silence as the confession echoed against the marble walls. Aria stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. Stability built on lies is not stability. It is rot, and it ends tonight. For the first time, Damon's composure shattered. Rage twisted his features as he hissed at Lucien. You and your pathetic waitress have ruined everything. The words hung in the air, damning and undeniable. Reporters scrambled to capture every second, cameras flashing like lightning. The dynasty Damon had tried to protect collapsed instantly under the weight of his arrogance. Lucien turned to the stunned crowd, his voice measured but unyielding. My family's legacy was built on a lie that silenced Ethan Crowell, a lie that erased Nathaniel Owen Cade. Tonight, that truth has come into the light. Mara lifted the velvet box from her lap. Her trembling hands opened it to reveal the ring, the phoenix gleaming beneath the chandeliers. For decades, it had been hidden in the shadows. Now it shone as proof. The ballroom erupted in whispers, the sound of history cracking open. Donors stepped back from Damon, his isolation immediate and merciless. The fortress he built on secrecy crumbled around him, exposing him under the glittering lights. Lucien placed a steady hand on the back of Mara's wheelchair, his expression grave but resolute. The reckoning had come, and though the dynasty stood shaken, for the first time in generations, there was a chance to rebuild, not with fear, but with truth. Aria looked at her mother and then at Lucien. In that moment, she understood that the ring had done its work. The phoenix had risen, not in fire but in revelation, consuming lies and leaving behind the possibility of something new. The gala would be remembered not for its chandeliers or wine, but as the night the Cade Empire was unmasked. And in that reckoning, the story of Aria Vale and Lucien Cade was forever bound to history. The aftermath of the gala unfolded with the velocity of a storm. Within hours, headlines blazed across every news outlet. The Cade dynasty unmasked. Heir admits to century of corruption. Leaked records confirm extortion and theft. The carefully constructed image of untouchable power dissolved under relentless scrutiny. Stock prices wavered, board members scrambled, and the press circled the family like wolves scenting blood. Lucien Cade withdrew from the public eye, refusing to comment beyond the words he had already spoken in the ballroom. He knew silence would not save him, but empty denials would only feed the fire. Instead, he worked quietly from his tower, dismantling pieces of his empire with surgical precision. Charitable fronts stripped away, shell companies dissolved. Secrets once hidden behind layers of lawyers and offshore accounts dragged into the light. It was not an act of self-destruction, but of rebirth. tearing away rot so that something new might rise. For Arya Vale, the days after the gala were a blur of cameras and questions. Reporters camped outside the hospital, demanding interviews with her mother. Mara refused them all, choosing instead to sit by the window of her room, looking out at a garden she had not seen in years. The light in her eyes was softer now, the weight of decades lifted. She told Arya once, in a quiet moment, that she finally felt free. The truth had cost much, but it had given back her dignity. Arya carried the ring everywhere. The velvet box no longer felt like a burden, but like a torch. She studied its feathers, the sapphire eye that gleamed even in shadows, and felt the pulse of history in her hand. It was no longer just her grandfather's relic. It was proof, it was legacy, it was the key that had unlocked everything. One evening, Lucian appeared in Mara's room, dressed not in the armor of suits, but in simple clothing that made him look almost ordinary. He carried a leather-bound document and set it gently on the table. "The Daniel Owen Cade Foundation," he said quietly. "It will exist to support inventors and artists silenced by power. A portion of my family's fortune will endow it. Ethan Crowell will be its first honorary beneficiary." Mara's frail hand trembled as she touched the cover. "You have honored him," she whispered. "You have honored them all." Lucian nodded, but his gaze was fixed on Arya. He drew his ring from his finger and placed it beside the phoenix ring in the box. The two lay together, twin flames reunited after nearly a century. One for the builder, one for the guardian. The balance was restored at last. Arya stared at the rings, her chest tightening. The weight of generations rested between them. She looked up to find Lucian watching her, his voice steady but carrying a plea beneath the steel. "I can rebuild the company, but it has been missing its soul for a century. Help me bring it back." She held his gaze, searching for arrogance, for condescension, for the predator she had first seen under the diner's neon lights. But all she saw was resolve, and a flicker of humility hard won. "Yes," she said, "let's give them a legacy to believe in." The weeks stretched into months. The scandal did not vanish, but the world's hunger for fresh outrage eventually dulled its teeth. In its place came a strange fascination with the rebirth of the Cade Empire. Analysts debated whether Lucian's restructuring was genuine or merely cosmetic. Yet every headline that named the Daniel Owen Cade Foundation chipped away at cynicism. Every scholarship awarded to a young inventor, every grant to an artist, every speech Arya gave in her mother's name breathed life into a new narrative. The dynasty had been built on theft, silence, and fear. Now it was being rebuilt on something rarer: truth, integrity, partnership. Late one night, Arya returned to the Lantern Diner. The booths were cracked as always, the fluorescent lights humming, the air still carrying the scent of grease and coffee. She sat at the same counter where it had all begun. Chloe poured herself a cup, shaking her head with disbelief. "You really turned the world upside down, Arya." Arya smiled faintly, fingers brushing the velvet box in her pocket. "No," she said softly. "The world was already upside down. We just finally set it right." The phoenix had risen, not in fire but in truth, its wings spanning across generations. And as Arya looked out the window at the city lights, she knew the legacy of silence had been broken forever. The ashes had given way to foundations. From those foundations, something new and unshakable would arise. Winter pressed against the city with sharp winds and gray skies. Yet inside the newly christened Daniel Owen Cade Foundation, the atmosphere carried a quiet sense of rebirth. The headquarters had been chosen carefully, not within the glass towers of Cade Holdings, but in a restored brick building on the riverfront, its walls etched with history rather than polished to perfection. Here, inventors walked the halls with sketches, artists pinned prototypes to boards, and voices filled the air with ideas no longer strangled by fear. Arya Vale moved through the corridors with a sense of wonder she could not entirely disguise. She had grown up in the hum of diners and hospital rooms, not boardrooms and archives. Yet somehow she now stood at the center of a broken and reborn legacy. Her reflection in the glass doors startled her sometimes. She no longer looked like a waitress weighed down by exhaustion. She looked like someone carrying a torch, and the flame was not hers alone. Lucian Cade studied financial ledgers in the boardroom upstairs, his posture as precise as ever, but the edge of detachment was gone. He once saw numbers as weapons, profits as victories, and power as armor. Now he studied them as tools, means of building something that could withstand scrutiny instead of hiding from it. He glanced up when Arya entered, his expression softening in ways that still surprised her. She said the first grants will be announced next week, so she is setting a folder on the table. Inventors from 3 countries, all with projects that corporations dismissed as impractical. They will not be silenced the way Ethan was. Lucian closed the ledger, his gaze steady. It is a beginning, but you know the dynasty's enemies will not vanish. Damon still lurks, and others who thrived under the old ways will not forgive easily. Arya's jaw tightened. Let them come. We have proof. We have the truth. Lucian nodded, but did not speak. He looked down at his bare hand where the family ring had once sat. The absence weighed on him, a constant reminder of what had been lost and what had been chosen. The ring now lay in the velvet box beside its twin, no longer a symbol of dominance but reconciliation. For the first time, he felt free, yet the freedom was heavy. That night, Arya visited her mother. Mara sat by the window, a blanket across her knees, the garden below dusted with snow. She looked stronger, though her illness still lingered like a shadow. Arya placed the velvet box in her hands. Mom, they are together again, both rings, both stories. Mara opened the lid slowly. The 2 phoenixes gleamed side by side, twin flames of pale gold, sapphires catching the weak light. Tears welled in her eyes. Your grandfather would have wept to see this, not because of vengeance, but because of justice. Arya pressed her mother's hand. It is not over yet. There are still questions. Mara's voice was faint but unmistakable. There will always be questions, Arya. The past is a labyrinth, but you have found the center. Do not let it trap you. Use it to guide the future. Later that week, Lucian and Arya stood together in the Foundation's atrium as workers mounted a bronze plaque. It bore the words "Integrity is greater than gold, Ethan Crowell." Beneath it, smaller text read, "Dedicated to all who were silenced, but not forgotten." Reporters gathered, their cameras clicking, their questions sharp. One asked if this was redemption or simply rebranding. Lucian's answer carried through the hall. Redemption is not mine to claim. It belongs to those my family wronged. What we do here is not erasure. It is acknowledgement. Arya added her voice, steady as stone. Truth is not a weapon. It is a foundation. We are here to build upon it, not bury it again. The flashbulbs exploded like stars. For once, Arya did not flinch. She stood taller, her mother's fire burning through her veins. When the crowd dispersed, Lucian lingered by the plaque. He spoke softly, almost to himself. I was raised to believe inheritance was a fortress to defend. Now I see it is a weight to carry. The heavier it feels, the more careful you must be when placing it down. Arya met his gaze. Then place it wisely. Outside, snow drifted down, covering the city's scars in white. For the first time in generations, the Cade name stood not as an unassailable dynasty, but as a fragile truth held together by 2 rings, 1 waitress, 1 heir, and the promise that the phoenix had indeed risen. Spring came softly to the city, unfurling blossoms across avenues that had weathered the long winter. In the riverfront district, the headquarters of the Daniel Owen Cade Foundation had begun to hum with life. Inventors carried blueprints under their arms, artists filled the gallery spaces with prototypes, and young engineers spoke in voices bright with hope rather than dulled by fear. What had once been a relic of corruption was now a seedbed for new beginnings. Arya Vale moved among them, her presence not as an executive but as a witness. People looked to her as the keeper of the story, who had refused to let silence win. She carried that weight not with pride, but with steady determination. At her side, Lucian Cade walked a quieter path than before. The arrogance had burned away in the fires of exposure, leaving a man who had seen the cracks in his dynasty and chosen to mend them instead of hiding them. On a clear morning, they stood together in the central atrium as sunlight poured through high windows. The two rings lay within a glass case, displayed side by side upon dark velvet. Visitors paused reverently before them. Children pressed their faces to the glass, teachers spoke of history's lessons, and journalists scribbled notes for stories less about scandal now and more about legacy transformed. Lucian studied the rings with an expression carved from both grief and resolve. One for the builder, one for the guardian. My family tried to destroy that balance. We cannot undo the past, but we can honor it now. Arya touched the glass lightly, her reflection overlapping with the twin phoenixes. It had been a secret hidden in a box beside her mother's bed for years. Now it was light, open for the world to see. She whispered as though speaking to Ethan Crowell himself. The promise is kept. Later that day, they gathered for the first official ceremony of the foundation. Mara Vale attended, her strength fragile but her spirit unbroken. She watched from her wheelchair as the first grants were awarded. Young inventors worldwide stepped forward, their projects ranging from renewable energy designs to medical devices that might save lives. Each recipient carried the fire of possibility and received not just funding but recognition. When Arya took the podium, her voice did not waver. My grandfather believed integrity has a weight greater than gold. For too long, that truth was buried under silence and fear. Today, we rise from those ashes. Today, we build something worthy of the sacrifices that came before. The applause rolled like thunder, echoing through the atrium. Mara's eyes filled with tears, and Lucian bowed his head as though in prayer. That evening, when the crowds had dispersed and the building had emptied, Arya and Lucian remained in the quiet hall. The glass case glowed softly under the lights. Two rings, two destinies, two stories once twisted into lies now finally restored. Lucian broke the silence. My family's wealth was never real. Not in the way we believed. It was stolen breath, stolen lives. But now it can become something else. Arya turned to him. Wealth is not what you inherit, it is what you choose to build. For a moment, the weight of centuries seemed to settle between them, then lift. The dynasty had been reborn, not as an empire of power, but as a foundation of truth. And at its center stood a waitress who had refused to bow, and an heir who had learned to kneel before justice. Outside, the city glowed under the rising moon. The river carried reflections of light like fire across its surface. Arya thought of the phoenix, wings spread in defiance, rising again and again from the ashes. The story was no longer a burden, it was a beacon. Lucian spoke softly, almost as if to himself. We give them a legacy to believe in. Arya answered without hesitation. Then let us make it one worthy of the name. Together, they stood before the glass case, side by side, their reflections merging with the golden phoenixes. The rings gleamed as if alive, guardians of a promise kept at last. And in that moment, beneath the vaulted ceiling of the foundation, the phoenix rose, not in fire, but in truth, carrying with it the power of voices once silenced, and the unyielding certainty that no empire of lies can stand forever.